The most dangerous moment in any leader's growth isn't when they discover what's been holding them back. It's actually what comes after it. Because the moment you decide to change, to actually shed the fear, insecurity, doubt, negativity, what we call bitches here, or the story, or the version of yourself that no longer fits, is the moment that you find out exactly who in your life needs you to stay exactly where you are. This is episode 3 of From Stuck to Leading, a 5-part self-coaching series where we are working together to move you through the exact steps my private clients use to go from stuck to leading in their full power. And if you don't see yourself as stuck, then consider the comments, feedback, or even performance review input that might be pointing out some gaps or blind spots. Episode 1, we worked on discovering who you really are as a leader. In episode 2, we named the 5 inner bitches, as we call them, the fears, insecurities, and doubts running your leadership from the inside out, and talked about how to confront them. In this episode, we're focusing on shedding all of that, not just acknowledging them, not just now naming them because we already have a name. We walk through what you can do to finally let go of those stories and those doubts so you can be the powerhouse that you're meant to be. If you've been following along, you may have downloaded the Leadership Gap Diagnostic, and this is the time where you're going to want to pull it out. If you haven't, then please go to balloffirecoaching.com/opt-in and grab it there. And you can hit pause for a moment and take that diagnostic. It takes about 10 minutes. There's 25 statements that will really give you some great information around where you are today and yet where any gaps might exist. And the scores you're going to receive from taking that assessment is exactly what you want to be using as we walk through this series. Welcome to Shedding the Corporate Bitch. I'm Bernadette Boas, executive coach, speaker, author, and founder of Ball of Fire Coaching. And today we're doing the work together that most leadership content never asks you to do. By the time we're done, you're going to know exactly what you need to let go, how to actually do it, and what to expect when the people around you notice that you're changing, evolving, growing in your leadership capacity. And that last part is the one nobody talks about. It might be the most important thing that I say today. If you haven't heard episode 1 or 2 yet, then start there. Check out the links, but go to balloffirecoaching.com/podcast and find the episodes there. Let me start with something that I constantly see in my coaching practice. A leader completes an assessment. Maybe it's a 360, maybe it's the Leadership Gap Diagnostic, or maybe it's just an honest conversation that one has with others around them. They first identify the gap or the challenge as if it's just a skill issue. Then they might dig into it further and they confront why that gap exists. They actually identify maybe the experience, the encounter, or the lack of expertise that has created this gap for them. And from that, we can actually name it. What is causing one to have a gap that's impacting their ability to lead? And from that, they have this breakthrough moment where everything clicks. And even though they've identified it and put a name to it, nothing changes. Not because they didn't understand it. It's more about the realization that naming something and being open to shedding what's creating it, or even that confronting of what's creating it, are two completely different things. Because shedding requires a decision, and that decision is harder than it sounds because it means releasing whatever doubt, insecurity, or fear that one is having, or even changing that story that they've been telling themselves their entire life. And it could be the feeling that they've had for a long time that the version of themselves is not really congruent with who they truly believe that they are. And the fear of having to step into the new version of themselves can be very, very scary. And stepping into something new also means that the people around you are going to notice. They're going to notice a change. They're going to notice a transformation. But let me be more specific about what I mean. Let's put you into a scenario. You have a boss who has always seen you as capable but manageable. You've been good at what you do, but you have stayed in your lane. You haven't pushed back. You don't raise up issues. You have no complaints. You haven't claimed the room. You haven't stood in your purpose and your value. You haven't led the way you actually know how to lead. Then all of a sudden, as a result of identifying it and naming it and recognizing what needs to be done in order to shift and change it, you start showing up with conviction, with clarity, with the kind of presence that says, I know what I'm doing and I'm not shrinking away from it. That confidence, that certainty. Suddenly, the support gets thinner from your boss. The feedback gets a little bit more critical. The advocacy disappears, not because your performance dropped, because your growth threatens something in them. Have you experienced that for yourself? Because I'll tell you, this happens more than you can imagine. I've watched it happen to client after client. And it's one of the most disoriented experience that a growing leader can have, because you did the right thing. And yet it feels like punishment when all of a sudden you're talking to a wall. But here's what I want you to understand. It is not punishment. It is information. Let me repeat that. It is not punishment when others start to notice you changing, you transforming, you shifting, you elevating yourself. It's not punishment when everyone else goes quiet, or when everyone else kind of turns their back or doesn't even acknowledge, recognize, or notice you. It's information. It's information about exactly who they are and who you can trust and who you can depend on, who you can really see as someone that is going to cheer you on as you continue to grow. It's actually the shedding, because that's what you're doing. You're letting go of old behaviors, old patterns, old mindsets, and you're shifting into a whole new place. And that shedding shows you exactly what and who was built around the old version of you. And that information is valuable, even when it hurts. I can remember when I left corporate and I did have this certainty and conviction around starting my own business. At the same time, I was scared to death. And I did share that with some people, but not everyone. And yet when I started going about building my business, and it was successful from the start, even in 2008, when everything else was imploding, I definitely saw the shift and the change in others toward my, what I'll call success in pushing through that fear and pushing through that uncertainty and pushing through that risk. And it really was a wake-up call, because it made me realize who was there to always support me and who was there for some other reasons that might be more beneficial to them than it was to me. And I landed up having to shed or walk away from a lot of those individuals, a lot of those places, a lot of those things that I was accustomed to doing. And now I had a whole different outlook on what, where, when, who I would spend my time and energy on. And here's what I want you to understand, and it's also a difficult thing for one to grasp. It's not about you. It's about them. And you need to understand that deeply so you don't withdraw or shrink back to who you were before and not stand firm in your conviction and your confidence that you've been working so hard to regain or build up. And so it's their job to do the work on themselves that you've done for yourself. And so walking through these 5 steps that we're talking about through this 5-part self-coaching series, it's not easy. There's definitely some uncomfortable moments. And yet, if you're willing and you're determined to actually move through to the other side and really become the powerhouse leader that you're meant to be, then you'll recognize that as you change, your outlook on everyone and everything around you is going to change, and so is theirs. But you can't control how they perceive you, how they adjust to you, how they welcome you. And you just need to be focused on yourself and the growth that you're looking for from yourself. Before we get into exactly how to shed, I also want to make sure we're clear on what shedding actually is, because most people hear that word and they immediately think elimination, fixing, getting rid of something that's broken. That is not what it is. Shedding is actually releasing a story that was never fully yours to begin with, that you have been carrying around and allowing to weigh you down. And there is a difference between who you are and who you were told to be that really the shedding process begins to help you understand and helps you look at very clearly. Shedding is the work of separating who you are and who everyone else, and that could be people, could be society, culture, who they want you to be. Let me start by giving you a framework for understanding what that separation looks like. And you can use it for yourself, obviously, but you can also use it to understand other people around you, your teammates, your peers, even your bosses and managers. There are 3 leadership identities that I see every day within the leaders that I coach. As you see these 3 identities, identify for yourself which one you're in right now, and then which one you want to be. So the first identity is the borrowed identity. It's the one that is built on external factors. It's built on title, validation, approval from the people around you, the expectations others have of you versus what you want and what you need for yourself. It's borrowed because it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the role, or it belongs to the company or the person who told you what kind of leader you should be. Strip those things away, those expectations, the validation, the need for approval, and there's absolutely nothing underneath that identity. And most leaders, sadly, spend a great part of their career in this space because they've never really taken the time to ask themselves the key questions that we've been addressing all along in these first 3 parts of this series, but also we'll address as we get into the next 2, which step 4 is going to be create, and step 5 will be accelerate, and then we'll tie it all together. But like myself, for 25 years, a lot of leaders are stuck here and they wonder why they're not advancing. They're wondering why they're not getting the bonuses or the salary increases that they are expecting, because they're working off of a borrowed identity. They don't know who they truly are, what they truly believe in, and they don't have the conviction and the confidence to stand in that regardless of what their culture or what their people around them or environment around them is demanding of them. So that brings us to the second identity, which is a performed identity. A performed identity is more evolved. They've internalized some of the right behaviors. They know how to lead. And yet it's almost like when they get in the spotlight, everything changes. They put on a performance, whether it's for their boss, their team, their peers, the room that they walk into. They all of a sudden become someone very different than who they are when that meeting ends and they go back to their day in, day out. And you know the gap is there. You know when you walk in and you put on a smile and you say the right things and you make sure that you're showing up appropriately. You probably have even felt it. And if you're like me, you probably even intentionally created it because you don't know who you are yet. And so you become someone else. You become who everyone else wants you to be, especially in a corporate environment where there's a lot of politics, there's a lot of performance that goes on from top to bottom. And yet it's exhausting, absolutely exhausting to maintain that mask, as I would always call it. It's a mask of who you truly are, what you truly want, who you know you can truly be, and the person that you think has to show up each and every day for the team and the people around them. And in a lot of cases, when I get new clients, a good majority of them are in this state. They're in this identity of performing as opposed to really understanding who they are and going out there authentically and genuinely in the way that they want to lead versus the way everyone else wants them to lead. But like myself and some other clients I've even worked with over the years, sad to say, there's a ceiling. There's a ceiling to how long a performance will actually last and get you somewhere. And so before you hit that ceiling, you definitely want to do the work, as my clients will do, really do the work to discover and confront and eventually let go or shed that performance so then you can genuinely show up each and every day authentically as a powerhouse leader, which leads us to the third identity. And this is the one you want to take hold of. This is the owned identity. And an owned identity is when you lead from your values, from your beliefs, from your truths, from who you want to be as a leader, not your boss, not the leadership book that you've been reading or the company culture that you're working in. As difficult as that is, I'm not going to belittle that. It can be difficult to truly lead the way you want to in a culture that may work against that. But the owned identity has a conviction and a certainty and a confidence that the way they lead can be done effectively and work for the benefit of the team and ultimately the company and hopefully the culture as a whole. And so these individuals are determined to do that because it's consistent. It's who they are. It doesn't change from one room to another, from one person to another. It holds up under pressure. It holds up under conflict. It just holds up. And it's a great modeling tool for those around you. If you really are a people leader who want to develop and grow your people, the best way to do that is to model what true leadership is, right? And so if you're an owned identity type of leader and you know who you are in your values, your beliefs, your truths, then that will just show up and get passed down to everyone around you. And the shed step is the bridge between each one of these type of identities. If there are places and people and circumstances and events and experiences that created these narratives within your own mind, and they have been projected in your behavior, in your words, in your actions, in your performance, then you find that these things aren't who you truly are, then you can always say, well, I'm going to let them all go and I'm going to change the story I've been telling myself. And we'll get into this in a little bit as we walk through the shed process. And I'll even share my own story that I've been touching on in episodes 1 and 2 around my being adopted. Let's now get into what those steps are to help you shed, let go of those fears, insecurities, doubts, those stories you've been telling yourself. First, take a look at your diagnostic. And again, if you have not taken it yet, hit pause, download it at balloffirecoaching.com/opt-in. Take 10 minutes to take it, come back and hit play. All right. So what you want to do is you want to take those lowest scores. We've talked about this in episode 1 and 2. Identify your lowest scores. Those are the ones that have these gaps. It could be self-awareness, executive presence, maybe it's accountability or team development, communication. There's a number of them. Find your lowest scores, anything below a 3. And as you listen, I want you to ask yourself a different question than you've been asking. I don't want you to ask, what skill do I need to develop or to fill in this gap? That's not the question I want you to ask. I want you to ask, what story do I need to stop telling about myself in order to close this gap? So if you have a gap in accountability, what does that mean? It means that you might have an experience, an event, an encounter that really found you afraid of confrontation, of disappointing someone or having someone not like you because you need to hold them accountable. There's a trigger that has created that apprehension, that fear, that insecurity about holding someone accountable. Dig in and keep asking yourself question after question as far as where did this come from when it comes to accountability? And do that for any of your low scores from your diagnostic. Remember, the gap in your diagnostic is actually that story being held open, being held in place as a result of you not changing that story, not letting go of that reel of where that story has been playing over and over and over again in your head. That is what I want you to do. I want you to identify your lowest scores, and I want you to identify the story you've been telling yourself about why that gap exists in that low score. All right. Now that you've been scribbling away in your journal, all these things that we've been discussing, whether it's your leadership gap diagnostic scores, whether it's the answers to the questions we've been talking about, or any of the other thoughts that have been coming up for you, once you have that, let's walk through exactly what you could do to start shedding those stories. All right. So the first step you already partially did. You identified the scores and you started working on the story. Now, the key here is not only that digging that I talked about, it's also being as specific as possible. Where were you? Who was it? What was said or done? What happened? What were your feelings and emotions following it? You want to be as detailed and specific. Put yourself back into those situations, whether it's one or more situations, and really feel and experience where that gap, so to speak, came from. All right. Because the more detailed you can be about it, the more you can see and find what you need to find in order to let it go. So let me give you a couple of examples, and I'm going to start with very general, and then what you need to do to really dig into where that belief or that story came from. So for self-awareness, for instance, you might be telling yourself, and if you ever felt this as you walked into a important room, or you were talking one-on-one with your boss, or maybe with a vendor, and you thought to yourself, if people really saw how I operate on day in, day out basis, they might lose respect for me. A lot of imposter syndrome there, right? For executive presence, the story you might be telling yourself is, I don't, show up like other leaders do. They're so sophisticated. They're so put together. And I'm not sophisticated. I'm not put together. I don't speak well. I don't have influence in a room. And for accountability, since we were there before, it could be, if I hold people to high standards, they're not going to like me. What is the story that you're telling yourself when it comes to that gap? And then, as I mentioned, you now need to ask, where did this story come from? Where did this belief get triggered? Because it didn't all of a sudden show up in your career. It came from somewhere. Now, it could have come from an experience at work, but it didn't show up yesterday. It didn't show up last year or 5 years ago. Most likely, it came from something, and not necessarily from work. But here's the kicker of all of this. That story is not true. It's a conclusion that you drew from the limited data that you were given, from that limited experience, that limited encounter. So let's find that evidence. If you've heard the acronym for FEAR as being false evidence appearing real, that's what we're working on right here, right now. What I want you to do is, this isn't about affirmations, it's evidence, it's proof, it's fact as to why these stories aren't true. For instance, let's look at executive presence. You're telling yourself, oh, I don't have the polish. I don't have the formality. I don't have the words that, the leaders around me use on a day in, day out basis. Well, that may be true. In this case, there may be skills that you need in order to show up with that executive presence, have those words, have that confidence, have that formality that you're modeling from other leaders. And you get that education, coaching, you get that training. And the next thing you know, you're practicing, and people are noticing. So you have been telling yourself all along, and maybe shrinking, that you don't have executive presence. And yet you have tons of evidence to show that with the training, with the development, with the coaching, with the mentoring, you can gain those things. You've done it before on a number of things in your 20, 30, 40, 50-year life. And therefore, that story you've been telling yourself, that ugly story you've been telling yourself, is not true. So for move 2 of the shedding process, I want you to take each one of those stories, whether it's 1 story or 10 stories. I want you to find 3 pieces of evidence of things that aren't true when it comes to the stories that you've been telling yourself. And I want you to write them out, because the more specific and proof that you find around that story, the easier it's going to be to let it go. Okay. Move 3 takes a lot of courage. And it's the one that a lot of growth gurus don't talk about. What I want you to do here is, this is for those in the performed identity, and they're moving to the owned identity. There is a specific person or group of people whose approval you've been working on and organizing around your leadership. It could be your boss, it could be a parent, it could be a former mentor, it could be the leadership team as a whole, it could be the board of advisors. It's a version of your peers you've been trying to match. Whomever it is, I want you to name that person or that group of people. I want you to write it down, but I also want you to say it out loud. I want you to acknowledge out loud that this individual or this group of people have been causing you to put on a mask and perform in a way that isn't truly you. because shedding requires knowing who you're letting go of, where you're letting go, when you're letting go. And what I mean by that is, I even learned for myself, there weren't only people I needed to let go. I needed to let go of social environments that I was going to that brought with it the type of people that I was trying to move away from. There were, times, let alone places, that I would have to switch up in order to avoid getting pulled back into putting on a mask that I no longer wanted to wear. And so really look at your entire environment and put a name to exactly who it is, where it is, when it is that you need to finally shed, so that new revised story you're going to be telling yourself can take hold. All right. But here's the warning that I had mentioned earlier in our conversation. As you are shedding and letting go, others are going to notice that. Others are going to notice that you're no longer around, or you're not going to the same places, or that you're not showing up in the same way that they're expecting, or that you're not performing in the way that they have trained you and managed you into. They're going to start noticing it, and their response may be very uncomfortable for you. And so you need to really stand in your conviction that you want something bigger, better, different, newer for yourself, and be okay with however that transpires around you. You need to be able to learn to manage that and walk through that. And that's a lot of the work that I do with my clients, is just helping them navigate the same team, the same environment, the same culture, and yet they're growing and they're advancing, not necessarily in their job, but in their mindset, in their beliefs, in their way that they're showing up each and every day in their leadership capacity. So you need to be prepared for that. Move forward. Now that you have found the stories that you've been telling yourself, you've found the evidence that those stories are not true, and you've identified the people, places, and things that you need to shed and let go. Now it's time to rewrite that story. You can now take ownership. This is the owned identity. You can take ownership of the story you want to live in, you want to show up as, you want to be around. What is that story? So for example, if you have felt that you don't belong, that was this old story, you found evidence that that wasn't true. The new story is now, I am in the room contributing value to the team. People come to me for guidance and coaching and advice. My team regularly shares with me how they appreciate my feedback. That's the new story that can replace the old story of that you didn't belong, or that you didn't want to hold people accountable because you didn't want to be disliked. What is that new story? Write it out. And similar, but not exact, to an affirmation, you want to keep telling yourself that story. And I want you to put it on a new reel that plays, because you already let go and threw away that old reel. So this is your new reel that you could play over and over again of what your story is. I belong. I bring value. I show up with great presence. Whatever it is, put it on a reel and let it play over and over and over again. All right. Now, finally, the fifth move of the shedding process is make one deliberate choice this week that comes from your new story. One action that you could be taking toward living in that new story that you have. And again, it could be just what you're telling yourself. It could be that after you've told yourself that, you're showing up in a whole different persona, a whole different projection. That's you, but yet you're showing up in a whole different state of mind. It could be the fact that you take a training or you hire a coach to work on some true skills that's created this gap. Whatever the case might be, identify just one deliberate choice you're willing to start working on this week, and add a action each week as you move forward. So it compounds and it moves you through the shedding process with a lot of excitement and a lot of energy. Because I will guarantee you, as you go through this discover, confront, and shedding phase, you are all of a sudden feeling freer. You're opening up more white space in your head, your heart. You're finding a different outlook on life and the people around you. Some of it will be easy, some of it will be hard. I've had to let go friends, intimate relationships, the places that I used to hang out in, the people that I used to work with, the clients, some clients that I used to have, and all this self-development, self-transformation work that we have to do for ourselves in our lifetime. There are going to be things that we need to shed in order to find our own identity. So if you're willing to do the work, then take one deliberate step or make one deliberate choice this week to start living your new story. Now I'll share with you my story about being adopted. And I've shared parts of this as we've gone through episodes 1 and 2. You can go to balloffirecoaching.com/podcast to find episodes 1 and 2. But my story is I'm one of 12 children. I'm the 8th. I have 6 brothers, 5 sisters. I was considered the milkman's daughter, the postman's daughter. I came out blonde, blue-eyed, fair-skinned. I didn't look, act, sound, anything like any of my brothers and sisters. From a very, very, very early age, I was always considered adopted. Everybody used to joke about it. They jest about it. Oh, she's the adopted one. And I was probably 9 or 10, went to my mother crying, Mom, am I really adopted? She giggled because she just thought I was being adorable. And yet I took it as, oh my God, she's, making fun of me. So it just cemented more of this insecurity I was building up around not fitting in, being adopted. And that stuck. Even though I got into my 20s, I began to look and sound like my brothers and sisters. I pretty much found the evidence that I was truly a Boas. Yet this idea that carried on all the way through high school, people teasing me about being the milkman's daughter or the postman's daughter, carried through into my 40s until I really went on my own shedding process in my mid to late 40s. Did I really sit down to understand, why did I feel like I never fit in? Why did I feel like I didn't belong? Why did I feel like I just didn't have a family, a community? Because if I didn't fit and if I wasn't a true Boas, then how can I be a true anything anywhere I was, whether it was at work or in my social life? And that wreaked havoc on me and certainly created a lot of the projection that I put out into the world. If you know my story, Shedding the Corporate Bitch, it's where everything stemmed from. And so in that shedding process, I found the evidence, a lot of it, tons of it, obviously. Not only that I was a Boas, but also that I always fit in. I always had a great group of friends. I always had a great team around me. I was part of whomever I was with. And so in my late 40s, I finally was able to shed and let that go. I bring this up time and time again because I really wanted to hit home that there are these experiences, incidents, encounters that we have in life that really set the course for how we feel about ourselves internally and therefore how we project out into the world. And if you really want to take ownership of your identity and of your ability to be a powerhouse leader, that's what I want for you. I want you to identify the reasons, the foundation for the gaps, the blind spots. I want you to be able to discover them. I want you to be able to confront them. And as we talked about today, I want you to be able to shed them once and for all. So I want you to ask yourself, what is that one specific story you've been telling yourself in a negative way about you as a leader? And what evidence exists to prove that story is not true, is not real? Answer that for yourself, dig in, and watch how the world changes around you. Because this is the one thing I want you to walk away with. The only thing shedding costs you is the version of yourself that was never fully yours in the first place. the version of yourself that is not allowing you to achieve what you want, the version of yourself that is preventing you from really feeling authentic in your own skin, the version of yourself that is fighting to get released in order for you to really fulfill the goals and the dreams that you have for yourself. It's waiting for you just on the other side of you discovering and confronting and then shedding what it is that's keeping you where you are today versus where you want to be. As we wrap up, first thing, if you haven't downloaded your Leadership Gap Diagnostic, it's free. Then go to balloffirecoaching.com/opt-in. Take 10 minutes to complete it, and it'll give you a plethora of information that you could be using to really transform how you're showing up each and every day as a leader. And then 2, come back for episode 4, where we get into how to create your new identity and how to create your new goals and aspirations that come as a result of what you have been working through in discovering, confronting, and shedding. And 3, go back to balloffirecoaching.com/podcast and find episodes 1 and 2. So you have all the steps of what I call the Shift to Riches formula. Discover, confront, and shed so you can create and accelerate. Until then, I'll look forward to having you for another episode of Shedding the Corporate Bitch. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Shedding the Corporate Bitch. Every journey taken together is another step towards unleashing the powerhouse leader within you. Don't miss any of our weekly episodes. Subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you love to listen. And for those who thrive on visual content, catch us on our Shedding the Bitch YouTube channel. Want to dive deeper with Bernadette on becoming a powerhouse leader? Visit balloffirecoaching.com to learn more about how she helps professionals, HR executives, and team leaders elevate overall team performance. You've been listening to Shedding the Corporate Bitch with Bernadette Boas. Until next time, keep shedding, keep growing, and keep leading.